Hello everyone, sorry I can't be physically with you. I used this AI generated avatar to play my presentation. There are three complementary ways to analyze social media: textual analysis, statistical analysis, and social graph analysis. Textual analysis examines recurring words, expressions, hashtags, names, synonyms, and themes. It reveals which topics and narratives are most prominent in the discourse. However, prominence does not necessarily indicate genuine influence. A term may appear frequently because a small group posts repeatedly, automated accounts amplify it, or users share content impulsively. Textual analysis can identify the dominant discourse and connect it to the accounts producing or sharing it. It can also distinguish between original posts, replies, and reposts. However, it does not fully reveal the social dynamics behind the discourse, who influences whom, whether information is spreading across communities, or whether the apparent activity is simply information dumping. Statistical analysis focuses on measurable quantities such as followers, likes, comments, views, and shares. Marketers, in particular, tend to search for the account with the largest audience or the post with the highest engagement. These indicators can also be misleading. A large number of followers does not necessarily translate into trust, influence, or diffusion. Follower accounts can be inflated, audiences can remain passive, and highly visible content may circulate only within a limited community. Research has therefore shown that follower count alone is an unreliable indicator of actual network influence. It is not enough to know how many times information was shared. We must also examine how far it traveled, how many intermediaries or hubs it crossed, which communities it reached, and whether it moved beyond its original audience. This brings us to the third approach: social graph analysis. Using NodeXL, social graph analysis can be conducted through semi-automated procedures or fully automated data recipes. It maps a population of accounts and interactions, making visible not only the most prominent actors, but also smaller, strategically positioned influencers. It can identify marginal communities with original perspectives, hidden opinion leaders, and the bridges that connect otherwise separated groups. These bridging actors can mediate discourse, introduce information into new communities, and reveal unexplored areas of common ground. Research on nonviolent civil resistance is sometimes summarized through the so-called 3.5% rule. Campaigns that mobilize approximately 3.5% of a population were historically very likely to succeed. This should be understood as an empirical historical pattern rather than a universal law. Nevertheless, it illustrates an important principle. A relatively small but organized and strategically connected minority can become politically decisive. Social graph analysis can help identify such emerging groups and observe whether their discussions are growing, spreading, fragmenting, or losing momentum. It does not merely provide a snapshot of social media at one moment. Through longitudinal analysis, it allows us to examine how ideas emerge, develop, spread, transform, and eventually disappear. Not all accounts occupy equivalent positions within a social network. An account may have 1 million followers, yet its information may not travel far beyond its immediate audience. Another account may have only 10 followers, but those followers could include political leaders, journalists, academics, institutional decision makers, or other highly connected individuals. Those 10 connections may generate more influence than a million passive or disconnected followers. Influence, therefore, depends not only on audience size, but also on the quality, position, and connectivity of that audience. Position within the network also plays a major role. Hubs have numerous connections and can mobilize people or disseminate information rapidly. Bridging nodes, by contrast, connect communities that would otherwise remain separated. Bridging nodes, by contrast, connect communities that would otherwise remain separated. They can transfer information between groups, mediate conflicting perspectives, and introduce innovative solutions when polarization has produced ideological lock-in. Consequently, social network analysis asks a more sophisticated question than who has the most followers. It asks who occupies a position from which information can genuinely travel and affect the network. Within this context, four major mechanisms can be used to influence or redirect public opinion: network interventions, psychometric profiling, and micro-targeting. The majority illusion. the polarization or depolarization of the discussion. Each mechanism relies on a different understanding of how individuals, information, and communities interact within a network. Behind the scientific term network intervention lies a relatively simple principle: changing behaviors or outcomes by acting on the structure of a network. In sociology, public health, and organizational research, network interventions generally serve constructive purposes. They may involve identifying opinion leaders, connecting previously separated communities, encouraging interaction between groups from different backgrounds, strengthening social cohesion, or reducing polarization. Thomas Valente defines network interventions as the purposeful use of social network data to accelerate behavioral change or improve organizational performance. However, knowledge of network structure can also be weaponized. Political or authoritarian actors may attempt to weaken a movement by silencing its hubs, isolating its communities, disrupting its bridges, or preventing information from circulating. Such actions may involve censorship, intimidation, infiltration, disinformation, arrests, or, in extreme cases, physical violence against strategically important actors. Infiltrating a community and provoking internal conflict can fragment the group. Removing a bridge can prevent coordination between movements. Silencing a hub can slow the diffusion of information. The scientific concept of network intervention is therefore neutral. Its ethical meaning depends on who intervenes, how they intervene, and for what purpose. In 2013, Michal Kosinski, David Stilwell, and Sol Greppel published a study demonstrating that Facebook likes could be used to predict a range of personal characteristics, including age, gender, ethnicity, religious and political views, personality traits, and other sensitive attributes. A related 2015 study found that computer-generated personality assessments based on approximately 70 Facebook likes could, on average, outperform the judgments made by a person's friends. More likes were required to outperform family members or spouses. The often repeated 70 likes claim therefore comes from the 2015 study, not from Kosinski's 2013 article. These studies demonstrated the potential of digital behavioral data for psychometric profiling. Cambridge Analytica later became associated with the political use of psychographic profiling and behavioral micro-targeting. Personal data and inferred psychological characteristics were used or claimed to be used to divide voters into audience segments and expose them to different political messages. One group might receive messages intended to generate enthusiasm and political participation. Another could receive messages designed to provoke fear, reinforce distrust, discredit an opponent, or discourage participation. The effectiveness of Cambridge Analytica's specific methods remains debated. Nevertheless, the case demonstrated the broader political risks created when personal data, psychological inference, and highly individualized advertising are combined. The majority illusion occurs when the structure of a network causes a minority opinion or behavior to appear much more widespread than it actually is. Consider a simplified example. Imagine a town containing the same number of Christians and Muslims, and only three churches. If the churches are located in a relatively isolated part of the town, visitors may not perceive Christianity as especially dominant. Now keep the population and the number of churches exactly the same, but place the three churches beside the town's principal entrances. Almost everyone entering the town will see them. Although nothing has changed statistically, the visibility of the churches may create the impression that the entire town is predominantly Christian. The same principle applies to social networks. You do not necessarily need to constitute a numerical majority. You need a limited number of visible actors occupying strategically important positions. Imagine that only one highly visible person in each community expresses the same opinion. Numerically, these individuals remain a small minority. However, to an observer, the message appears to come from every part of the network. The same claim is repeated in different communities, creating the impression that everyone thinks this. Research on the majority illusion shows that network structure can cause globally rare opinions or behaviors to become overrepresented in the local environments observed by many individuals. This is the power of the majority illusion. You do not need to be the majority to appear to be the majority. Political discussions are frequently polarized. Participants organize themselves into opposing camps. left versus right, Republicans versus Democrats, liberals versus conservatives, socialists versus capitalists, secularists versus religious conservatives, or nationalists versus globalists. These groups often use different hashtags, follow different sources, and circulate different interpretations of the same events. They interact primarily with members of their own community and rarely engage meaningfully with the opposing side. Even when they discuss the same topic, they effectively inhabit different informational worlds. However, not every social issue produces the same network structure. Some issues generate several interconnected communities. Different groups may approach the problem from distinct perspectives while still sharing information and agreeing on certain core principles. Others produce fragmented clusters, centralized broadcast support networks, or highly polarized crowds. These structures are not limited to politics. Mac and PC users may form polarized groups. Discussions about a new film may produce several community clusters. A customer service account may sit at the center of a support network. A news organization or celebrity account may generate a broadcast network in which information moves mainly from one central source toward a large peripheral audience. NodeXL makes these structures visible. It allows us to recognize that different forms of discussion produce different social architectures, and that each architecture requires a different analytical interpretation. NodeXL transforms thousands of accounts and interactions into an intelligible social graph. It combines visual mapping with quantitative metrics, allowing researchers and practitioners to measure centrality, identify communities, locate hubs and bridges, examine information pathways, and detect patterns of polarization or diffusion. Social media networks can therefore be transformed into structured quantitative data that can be used both in academic research and in professional practice. The objective is not simply to produce an attractive visualization. It is to understand the structure of a discussion, identify the actors who shape it, determine how information moves, and assess how the network is evolving. This understanding can ultimately support better decisions and more effective action during political campaigns, public debates, organizational challenges, and social or communication crises. I have been studying social media discussions professionally since 2010, and NodeXL has become one of my indispensable research tools. It has enabled me to map and analyze how political actors organize their communication, coordinate their supporters, and deploy different influence strategies. These may include automated amplification, decentralized guerrilla style campaigns, and networks in which individuals or groups are assigned distinct communication roles. In 2021, I received the Lokman Slim Award for a study examining the online discourse surrounding his assassination. The research showed how certain influencers attempted to shift the discussion away from the circumstances of the crime and transform it into an emotional and polarizing debate. Through disinformation and stigmatizing narratives, they sought to portray Lokman Slim as a collaborator and thereby undermine public sympathy for him. Another study allowed me to examine how the majority illusion can distort public perceptions. By strategically positioning a relatively small number of highly visible accounts across different communities, a minority can create the impression that it represents a substantial proportion, sometimes even half of the population. Several studies and practical experiences have also shown me how political actors can encourage people to take to the streets or persuade them to withdraw. One particularly effective strategy consists of discrediting the social hubs and opinion leaders supporting a protest movement. By turning these central figures into villains, political actors can weaken trust, fragment the movement, and undermine otherwise legitimate demonstrations. In 2017, a major political resignation was transformed into a subject of ridicule through the widespread circulation of memes on Facebook and WhatsApp. Humor shifted attention away from the political significance of the event and reframed it as entertainment, reducing a serious political crisis to a stream of jokes, memes, and viral reactions. Today, artificial intelligence, supervised and unsupervised machine learning, and advanced language processing tools are transforming social media research. Researchers can now analyze hundreds of thousands of posts more rapidly, precisely, and subtly than before. These tools make it possible to identify narratives, emotions, communities, influence patterns, and emerging forms of coordination at an unprecedented scale. This is a fascinating new field that we must continue to explore, understand, and critically evaluate. Before Twitter was acquired by Elon Musk, established researchers could obtain access to millions of tweets per month through academic research programs, often free of charge. The platform's APIs also provided structured samples that could be used for large scale analysis. Facebook once provided greater access to certain types of page and audience data, including information related to communities that organizations had invested considerable resources in building. Today, access to social media data has become considerably more restricted and expensive. Platforms frequently justify these restrictions on the grounds of privacy and security while continuing to provide broader access through costly commercial subscriptions. One lesson from the early days of computing remains relevant. Information that is publicly visible on a screen can often be collected directly or indirectly. However, such collection must comply with applicable laws, ethical research standards, platform policies, and privacy protections. AI-based tools can now assist researchers with the lawful collection, cleaning, classification, and analysis of online data. Many social media researchers also share practical tools and methodological guidance through professional networks such as LinkedIn. Commercial services such as Track My Hashtag can provide historical social media datasets acquired through authorized channels, sometimes at a more accessible cost than direct enterprise level platform access. I first met Mark Smith at a conference in Tampa in 2014, and we have remained in contact ever since. Research is not an activity conducted in isolation, especially in a field that evolves as rapidly as social media analysis. Knowledge develops through collaboration, exchange, critique, and lasting professional relationships. Stay curious, remain connected, and Godspeed.